What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 61, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to cover on today's show. The beginning of the Biden era here, and then the last of the news from the Trump administration, and talking about Biden's nominees' confirmation hearings. A lot of important stuff coming out on foreign policy. We'll get into all that on today's show. Remember to share the show. You can find it online at YouTube, where you get the video version of the show, or you can find the show at the libertarianinstitute.org. I'm also the news editor there, and you can find my daily news roundup there. To support this show, if you could do that through Subscribestar, and then it's /COI, or just search Conflicts of Interest, find the show. Anybody who donates $5 a month to the show, whether it's on Subscribestar, Patreon, or any other way you can find to give me money, I'll let you into a private Discord channel I'm making for the group, and we could talk in there. You could recommend news stories to cover on the show, guests, stuff like that. I really appreciate everybody who is supporting the show, either by sharing it or by donating to the show. You know, I use that money to try to improve what I'm doing here, make better products, and maybe if we start getting a little bit more income, I could start doing some more advertisement or stuff like that. Try really increase the viewers of the show. With that, let's get into the final Trump news here. All right, pardons. Pretty much a big want here. Like most of the Trump presidency, it's, pretty disappointing for the most part. Of course, he did pardon some nonviolent drug offenders, so that's good news. These people shouldn't be in jail, and so the fact that he's pardoning them is great. And we have a recent article by Jacob Solom here, titled "Freeing People Who Don't Belong in Prison is Praiseworthy No Matter Trump's Motives." And I think he's right on the money here, that I'm not a big Trump fan, and I've been pretty critical of him throughout his presidency, and especially his pardons. Look, he pardoned the 4 Blackwater murderers. They killed a couple children, and unarmed civilians, including Iraqi children, right? And so those are people you definitely don't want out of jail. But a lot of these nonviolent drug offenders are people who should be out of jail. And so, we could criticize Trump for, pardoning Steve Bannon. I think that's, fair. And certainly all these violent people that he's pardoned, these doctors that committed Medicare and Medicaid fraud, maybe some of them were over sentenced. Maybe some of the punishments did seem a little unfair, but at the same time, those certainly aren't the people who you need to prioritize getting out of jail. And of course, the biggest disappointment was that Trump didn't pardon either Assange or Edward Snowden, and then Ross Ulbricht was another name that people were really throwing around. I've talked about Ross last on the show, and maybe I need to do like a whole show on Ross at some point, but at one point he was running a website, or help to set up a website. I shouldn't actually qualify because I don't know the details of the case, and I know there's some important ambiguity there, but generally Ross was involved with the Silk Road, and the FBI tried to do some shenanigans on his website. And when they did, they claimed a whole bunch of absurd charges on Ross, and the judge threw the book at him for no reason. So he's certainly somebody who should have been up for clemency, and if not a full pardon, and then also pardons for Assange and Snowden, who should be welcomed back into. Well, Snowden should be welcomed back home as a hero, and Assange should be able to go wherever he wants in the world, whether that's his home country or wherever. At least as a man unwanted by the U.S. government, because all he's done is release documents to the American people that showed the war crimes of the American empire. All right, the UAE Arms Deal. This is, I guess, probably the last piece of news I'll have on the Trump era, which it feels kind of weird. I started this show, my old show, Foreign Policy Focus, pretty soon after Trump took office, and this being the last bit of news from the Trump administration. It's been, in a way, quite a wild ride, but at the same time, much of what I guess I expected, which was not too much deviation from the norm. I mean, we stayed in most of the wars. We kept selling weapons to these Gulf Arab states. This story here, UAE signs deal with U.S. to buy 50 F-35 jets and up to 18 drones. And this was apparently done right at the end of the Trump administration. And yeah, Trump was an arms dealer, and That was one of his big things, one of his big claims to fame. I guess I was kind of surprised at how interested he was selling arms around the world. You would think, the rhetoric of Mr. America First, that he would have been more interested in just making sure the U.S. had the arms, not the other countries, especially countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia that who knows what they're going to do with it. And, most of what they've done is commit genocide in Yemen, and Trump really hasn't cared a whole lot about that. So, I mean, I'll have to, I guess, now that the Trump era is officially over, sometime in the coming weeks, do a real show looking back at some different parts of the Trump administration. I know me and Connor Freeman spoke recently about the idea that Trump was an anti-war president, really went at trying to debunk that myth. But just looking at the Trump administration overall, and one of the most interesting things, I guess, was the media coverage of Trump and just how hostile it was, and about the most trivial things. Very rarely were there reports, especially from the mainstream media, about the horrific things that Trump was enabling Saudi Arabia to do in Yemen, or the horrible things that the U.S. was doing in Somalia, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, meddling in West Africa. Very little criticism of his trade war with China. There was some, that was something, but no criticism of his aggressive maneuvering in the South China Sea and through the Taiwan Strait, and all these, buildups with the Modi government in India, which, I think if people were looking for what people were predicting the Trump government to be, I think if you looked at maybe Modi in India or Netanyahu in Israel, you would kind of see the actual right-wing, brutal, uncaring about the rights of minorities leader that Trump was portrayed as. I'm not saying that to some extent that wasn't true about Trump, but what people thought Trump would be were these governments that, Trump was very close with Modi. He was very close with Netanyahu, but he was rarely attached for those relationships, and should have been. The support that the U.S. gives to Israel allows for them to oppress the Palestinians. And certainly if we, took a harder line stance on India, or at least refused to sell that government weapons, we would be less involved in enabling the, oppression of the 100 and something million Muslims who live in India, plus, the entire territory of Kashmir, which, is a real hot zone. There's been pretty close conflict between India and Pakistan during the Trump administration, and all that was in part enabled by Trump's increasingly coarse relationship with Modi, because of his xenophobia directed at China. This is one thing that that was interesting about the Trump, and especially the anti-Trump movement, is everybody in the anti-Trump movement was so focused on the ideas of racism and jingoism and xenophobia, and yet the Democrats throughout the Trump administration engaged in a lot of Russophobia, and certainly had they been saying the things they were saying about Russians, about almost any other ethnic group of people, would have been rightly shamed as racism. But Trump got away with a lot of anti-Chinese rhetoric, and there were times when they pushed back, like when he said China virus, there was some outrage. But generally speaking, the way Trump was able to portray the Chinese government as like this dangerous, and the Chinese in general as this danger to the U.S., he essentially got away with him, and most of the mainstream media agrees with him. And if you look at places like Syria, they cheered him on when he was more aggressive against Assad. They booed his withdrawals from Iraq and Afghanistan. They didn't say boo about the genocide in Yemen that Trump is enabling Saudi Arabia to carry out. Over 200,000 people killed in that war so far, and that's just the conservative UN total. I mean, that the UN number was at like 13,000 through 4 years, when everybody knew that the number was in the hundreds of thousands. And it wasn't until ACLED this monitoring group pushed a higher number that the UN finally bumped it up. And so I think as other groups are able to come in, which Saudi Arabia essentially had a blackout, they don't let journalists in that country. Some aid workers get in, but it's pretty limited. I know one time there's some mainstream media camera crew couldn't believe it that the Saudis rejected their, ability to travel to Sana'a through this war. And so people really don't know the extent of the damage of that war yet, but I'm guessing it's far higher than the 200,000 that we're already at. And it's just an indiscriminate war to kill the people of Yemen. The Saudis are trying to brutalize the people of Yemen into completely capitulating to their will and allowing the Saudis to steal their resources, change their land and water boundaries, and install whatever kind of government they want in Yemen. And the U.S. is enabling it essentially for none of our own benefit. It's kind of crazy in the last day of the Trump administration. I've been talking a lot about this, the labeling of the Houthis as a terrorist organization. I'll talk about that a little bit more later with Blinken's statement. I do want to take a quick second to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your CBD products. Carlos and Vanessa Abla run a great company there. It was, one of those brand new starting out at the beginning of the COVID thing happening. Of course, that means the government, rules and lockdowns put their physical storefront out of business, but they've evolved and adapted and are now sponsoring podcasts, trying to get the word out about their great products that could help you, physical health, mental health. Definitely check out. They have all kinds of stuff, soft gels, extracts, gummies, however you want your CBD, different doses. It's all lab tested results. And hey, if you're somebody who hasn't tried a lot of CBD yet, but you're in a little bit of pain, a little bit of emotional distress, and want something to see maybe help you out, go just to PalomaVerdeStore.com and check out their education page, see how maybe it could help you. Just make sure when you make your purchase, you use the promo code PEACE so they know you came from this show. Once again, PalomaVerdeStore.com, promo code PEACE. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, the next thing I have here is a clip from John Brennan, former CIA director. I call him Obama's ogre because of how ugly he is and how he sat in the basement and carried out drone strikes through the Obama years. So, this is a guy that has literally terrorized an entire region of the earth with his drone strikes, from Afghanistan to Yemen to, Syria to Iraq to Somalia, Libya. All these people have suffered under U.S. drone strikes. You hear stories about how people in Afghanistan, when they see a drone, if you're in a group of people, you all run in different directions. That way, hopefully, if they do decide to bomb you, as few die as possible. One of the reasons for this is in a recent year, there was a 30-something farmers who were picking tree nuts or something, right? And after a hard day of work, I guess, they were all standing in one spot. U.S. drone came by, blew them off the face of the earth. Well, this is the kind of terror that John Brennan has unleashed on the world, but let's see who he thinks are the terrorists.
On the call, I was thinking today that this is the most relaxed I've been in the course of many inaugurations I've watched, because I'm not responsible for it. But I can tell you that when I was in the government, I had white knuckles because of the nature of the threats. But it's so much more difficult today because of what we have seen, not just over the last 2 weeks, but that certainly has riveted our attention, but because of this growth in polarization in the United States and domestic violence in white supremacist groups. So I know, looking forward, that the members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of a country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. And unfortunately, I think there has been this momentum that has been generated as a result of, unfortunately, the demagogic rhetoric of people that just departed government, but also those who continue in the halls of Congress. And so I really do think that the law enforcement, Homeland Security, intelligence, and even the defense officials are doing everything possible to root out what seems to be a very, very serious and insidious threat to our democracy and our republic.
I want to read you a little bit of how Tom.
All right, so again, that's former CIA director John Brennan, and importantly, he was the CIA director during the Obama administration, and definitely took an anti-Trump approach, and so now he's going to be, I think, more politically influential and probably have more of an idea of what's going on within the administration. And so when he says that the intelligence agencies, I assume he would mean FBI, because the CIA isn't supposed to operate within the United States, but who knows, I'm sure they do. When he says they're moving with laser-like focus to try to uncover what he says are insurgency movements similar to what we see overseas, and then names libertarians within the group. I mean, in a way that's pretty terrifying, right? This is a guy who ran the drone program. He was involved in Bush's torture program. When we look at like Syria and what happened in that country, he was behind the Timber Sycamore program, which was how the CIA funneled weapons to the Sunni opposition to Bashar al-Assad. Predictably, even by the own Obama government, this blew up and all the weapons went to the jihadists. So John Brennan is essentially the best friend of Al-Qaeda in Syria. He's the one that gave them arms and almost allowed them to overthrow Assad in Syria. And certainly, as predicted again by the own Obama administration, the Timber Sycamore program led to the establishment of an Islamic caliphate in Iraq and Syria. Exactly as they predicted. And John Brennan's behind that. So in one sense, I'm waiting for a crate of weapons to show up at my door, since John Brennan has, now labeled libertarians as insurgents. But much more seriously, I think that unlike in what he would do overseas, he would be concerned about, the kind of insurgents that oppose the government. And so I think he'd be far more likely to use lethal, but like espionage type means to like undermine these type of groups. Now, the other issue here is that he lumps libertarians in with racist, nativist, and every other ugly word he could think of, right? Which is quite disturbing. A good amount of the libertarians that I know are pretty left-wing people. They have a huge portion of the Libertarian Party is left libertarians that are oftentimes far more socially progressive than most Democrats, and are very interested in like feminism and BLM, and are very supportive of those movements. And so I think it makes no sense at all to lump libertarians in with those kind of groups. Obviously libertarian is a pretty big umbrella, and so while some people in the libertarian movement are from more of a right-wing background, and our right-wing libertarians, far more concerned about, being a Boogaloo boy than, SJW or anything like that. To lump everybody in together is a quite concerning statement. And obviously, libertarians believe in non-aggression, that the main part of the Libertarian Party, or, I don't think that's a good way to encapsulate the libertarian movement necessarily, but, the Libertarian Institute, the Libertarian Party, the Mises Institute, if you look at any big libertarian groups, they're committed to non-aggression. That's the one part about libertarianism. That's why we oppose people like John Brennan, because he carries out drone strikes overseas, and that's aggression. We don't believe in doing that stuff. So that's that's the John Brennan clip. I will say we gotta keep an eye on what's happening with this guy if he starts to get close to power. A position in the Biden administration. Make sure the people who are close to John Brennan, who are John Brennan acolytes, if they get positions within the Biden administration, those are people that we legitimately have to watch out for, because he's now put a target on us. And as I've said in the show, and if you want more information on how terrible John Brennan is, I highly recommend Scott Horton's new book, Enough Already. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute, and he really smashes. And that's probably why we got labeled, is because Scott was so brutal on Brennan and exposing how he armed the terrorist. interesting story here that I want to talk about because I think it's important, and I think a lot of people are talking about it wrong. This is from NPR. Nearly 1 in 5 defendants in Capitol riot cases served in the military. So a lot of people are talking about this from one perspective, which is that there are white nationalist or white supremacist movements within the U.S. military, and that's why there's a disproportionate number of them at the Capitol. I honestly don't know how true that is. I've read some stories about white nationalism being within the army and the military, and so it may be disproportionate. I don't know how disproportionate compared to the American population. I don't think there are a whole lot of actual like hardcore racist people probably as Americans, but hell, if you really want to kill brown people, like if that's the kind of terrible racist monster of a person you are, I guess the best way to do that legally would be to join the U.S. military. I mean, I could definitely see that, or becoming a U.S. cop, right? If you want to get away with murdering brown people, those are probably the two best ways to do it. And so if you did see a disproportionate number of white nationalists as cops or as soldiers, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. And I know that would not be the motivation also of almost every cop and soldier, right? Like, people joined up because of patriotism and because they saw really cool war movies and economic reasons. There's tons of other reasons to join, but I'm for the small number of people that are like that may be a window they see. And so there may be some, disproportion. But, I think one of the things that you have to look at when you see the military and you see, they say that these people believe in QAnon and conspiracy theories. Well, if you take a group of people who you lied to, you said that the terrorists attacked us because they hated our freedoms, that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, that Gaddafi was giving his soldiers Viagra to rape women, that Assad used chemical weapons, that we need to fight this war in Yemen, that we need to arm the Sunni opposition in Syria. All these kinds of things, I would guess, made soldiers very skeptical of what is coming out of the mainstream media. And that's probably why they like Donald Trump, is because the people who lied them into war really, really hate Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that's the greatest reason to support Donald Trump, but if you're not thinking about it too hard, it does make a whole lot of sense why you would support Donald Trump. Now, I mean, he spent 4 years being a warmonger, although he did turn off the Timber Sycamore program and stop arming the Sunni resistance to Assad so much. So, there is some places that I think people who really want to believe in Donald Trump could believe he ramped down some wars. If you look at kind of what happened with reducing troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, only 2,000 from the start of his presidency, but nonetheless, you could find the kind of stories that makes it seem like, Trump was less of a warmonger than Obama and certainly than Bush and probably Biden. So that's where we're all are on the vets story here. I just thought that was real interesting, the disproportionate number, and I think that probably has a lot to do with vets probably not trusting the mainstream media so much. Oh, I had one other note too. It was that the care that the vets get from the VA in terms of like burn pits victims still not getting recognition and dying. I'm sure is something that adds to that. All these people, oh, the troops, we love our troops. Yeah. Oh, here's another great example of that. Not to go down too many tangents here, but just real quick, they're celebrating all the National Guardsmen in the Capitol for the inauguration. They're taking pictures with Lady Gaga and Nancy Pelosi. Everybody is going gaga over the National Guard. They're celebrating that they're there and that they're protecting Joe Biden, and so important. I find it creepy, but that was the mainstream media narrative. The day after the inauguration, there's all these pictures. They get the National Guard out of the Senate cafeteria and send them to sleep in a parking garage. And so that's kind of how the establishment treats the troops in general. When they're useful to exploit for their causes, they do. and when they're not, they just leave them to rot and die. And so that's certainly what's happening with the burn pits. And I'm sure, a high number of vets having PTSD. It probably can't be an easy time, to be a vet with this past year. Further isolation is probably exacerbating symptoms of PTSD, and so that also could contribute to all of this. President Biden has said that he will keep Trump's FBI director Christopher Wray in that position. I don't really have a whole lot on Christopher Wray. I don't know a ton about him, but that is a note that he's going to keep Trump's FBI director. Let's see. Okay, I have two stories here on China real quick. The first one is China lost the account of China's U.S. embassy over its defense of Beijing policy. And so this is from Reuters. And China, the Chinese embassy tweeted out a clear piece of propaganda claiming that their programs in Beijing, which is where the Muslim population in China, the Uyghurs, where they live, were successful. And it was a dirty piece of propaganda. It wasn't like something that you like to see or something like that, claiming that essentially their communist re-education programs were successful in getting the Uyghurs to be better people, and that's kind of gross. But then Twitter locked the account. The concern around this is that the Chinese embassy account for the U.S. is going to tweet in English and is going to put forward narratives that the Chinese government wants the U.S. people to hear. Now, I don't think that, I think it's important that the U.S. media cover this story and say that, look, this is the tweet that China put out and this is the reality of what's going on in Xinjiang. It's not what they, claim. It's not this great paradise for the Uyghurs. It's actually, horrible communist programs and re-education camps. But simply silencing it is foolish, because this isn't the only thing that this account is going to tweet. They'll probably tweet about U.S. aggression in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. And these are important issues to the Chinese government, and it's important that the American people understand that those are important issues to the Chinese government. And then another article from Reuters titled, Taiwan Biden Ties Off to a Strong Start with Invite for a Top Diplomat. So what we saw under the Trump administration is more and more diplomatic and official diplomatic visits between the U.S. and Taiwan. China sees this as the U.S. going against the one China policy we agreed to. We agree that the government in Beijing is the government of China, and that includes Taiwan. However, we kind of support the U.S. Well, we do support the Taiwanese government. But one of the ways we've kind of walked that thin line for many years is by not having many official visits with the Taiwanese government. And the Taiwanese ambassador has never previously gotten an actual invitation to the inauguration. But that's what happened this time. And so I'm sure China will be upset. But more important, I think it's a signal of what we're going to see in the Biden administration, which is more steps towards Trump's China policy, which is aggression against China. All right, on Biden's first day in office, he released a list of, I believe, 27, 17 executive orders. A good chunk of these have to do with immigration, and I think are generally positive. Stop border wall construction, end the Muslim travel ban. Let's see. I'm not sure if there are any other. All right, that might be it for the immigration ones. The one that I thought was probably the most objectionable would be to count non-U.S. citizens in the U.S. Census again. If you're going to have a census, I think that's supposed to be of U.S. citizens, so I don't understand why you would count non-citizens. There's a few climate change things in here that I'm generally opposed to, and the Keystone XL pipeline. and rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. I think there are like some spending commitments and stuff in the Paris Climate Agreement, some new regulations that it's, signaling the Biden administration is going to put on. Here are two more that, are a little bit, I guess, complicated this year because the government has prevented people from working, and at the same time has bailed out big banks and will give money to mortgage companies or anybody who's holding bad mortgages, but is unlikely to actually just give people money, or would give people less money generally than the big companies. And so it's not the worst thing in the world to extend the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums and continue the pause on student loan payments until the end of September, again, because the government is keeping people from working. But at the same time, this is probably something that should come through Congress and not through executive order, because it is a lot of money that needs to be at least delayed in being repaid, if not actually, it's coming out of somebody's pocket here. Change Trump's arrest priorities for immigration and customs enforcement. That's probably a good one, because Trump's immigration policy was pretty horrific, and the way he empowered the ICE people to go out there and round people up was pretty ugly. And so that's probably a good move that actually should come through executive order. Biden has signed more executive orders since. There's a bunch on COVID that I haven't had a chance to look through, and I'm sure more to come in recent days. I remember when Trump took office, everybody was freaking out about the executive orders that he signed. A lot of things now in the U.S. government essentially get switched on and off by executive order at the beginning of different presidential administrations, depending whether they're Republican or Democrat. So I'm guessing there's some of that to come too. All right, so a little bit of good news at the start of the Biden administration here. I say a little bit, there's a little caveat behind that, but it doesn't look too bad. And as Biden's press secretary says, Biden aims, this is written up by Will Porter at RT, Biden aims at 5-year extension of New START treaty while seeking to demonize Russia for hacking, meddling, and bounties. And so, Will does something real important here, because most people who commented on this just commented on the Biden aims to extend the New START treaty for 5 years, which is good. I really hope that this gets done. It's the last remaining arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia, and really needs to be extended. However, for negotiations to take place and for this treaty to get extended, my guess is that the Biden administration can't be taking actively hostile other measures against the Russian government, right? So, if you're trying to extend the agreement with, your landlord that you have, but then you're also like trying to buy a car from him, and you're being completely absurd in your negotiations with the car, like saying you're only going to pay $10 for it, and that he has to pay for your gas for the first 6 months. He might not, want to renew your lease for your house because you're being absurd. And I think that's part of what we're going to see here. As Will says, however, the press secretary added that Biden would also pursue an intelligent assessment of what she dubbed as reckless and adversarial actions by Moscow, citing alleged Russian bounties to pay to Afghan fighters, which have repeatedly been dismissed even by the Pentagon. And so here we, have a debunked story that the Biden administration is trying to revive. She also then cites the solar wind hack, which may have been Russia, may not be. And then, what was the other one? Oh, the election meddling and stuff like that, which also has been debunked. And so I find it pretty concerning here that the Biden administration is also going to take all these other steps. If we have until February 5th for this to get done. If on February 1st, the Biden administration is dropping a whole bunch of sanctions on Russia, claiming that Putin ordered the chemical weapons poisoning, which I think is a pretty dubious claim of Alexei Navalny, opposition figure in Russia. If we're sanctioning Russia for cracking down on protests within Russia, I think Russia's going to be a whole less likely to want to negotiate or to extend an arms control agreement. As I said, the relationship with Russia is very complex, and you can't just say that, oh, right over here is the New START treaty and we're going to extend that while sanctioning you and just expect that Russia will go on with it. Now, Russia may really want to stay in this agreement, and even though the U.S. really isn't negotiating in real great faith, if we're making up all the Biden administration is releasing intelligence assessments on buck evidence claiming that the Russians funded bounties on U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, Russia might go along with it anyways and extend the treaty because they really want it done, but it seems like reasons that they may not be so interested in having intense negotiations. All right, so let's see, where are we now? I have one story on Avril Haines here. She did get confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence. This is Avril Haines. In the past, she has worked in the U.S. intelligence community and was critical in helping the Obama administration have legal justifications for their drone strikes. And so, whenever you're going and flying a drone over another country and you have, unilaterally decided within the executive branch of the Obama administration that you're going to kill somebody, and then that bomb either kills the person that you are targeting plus a child, or just kills, let's say, a school full of children, well, there are some potential legal ramifications for that, and it was Avril Haines who made sure that those, nobody in the Obama administration was ever held legally or criminally responsible for killing any of these people, financially even. John Brennan, Barack Obama are people who, have benefited from the legal work of Avril Haines. She also made sure that there wasn't an investigation and covered up the investigation, worked to make sure nothing came out of it for the, torture program during the Bush administration, and then the spying on the Senate by the CIA when they were investigating the torture program. And so Avril Haines is definitely an establishment swamp finger, somebody who will go along with the way they want things to be. Now, I had this article here from Reuters, and one of the interesting things that we see is the whitewashing of torture to help to approve or get Obama's pick confirmed here. And so this is the second to last paragraph here. In a possible effort to neutralize a threat, Haines told the committee she would not endorse the use of harsh interrogation techniques and would not permit their use. And so she's calling torture there harsh interrogation techniques. It's just quite a bit of double thinking and whitewashing of what's happened. Now, she also confirmed to Tom Cotton that she would not in any way look to investigate, the use of these techniques in the past. And that was one of the barriers, or one of the concerns about Avril Haines, is that she may investigate the torture program under the Bush years, but she confirmed that she has no interest in holding war mongers and people who tortured people to death accountable. I have a story here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. I'm now getting into the stories I have on the confirmation hearings of Biden's Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, and his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Now, Haines has been confirmed. Blinken has not been yet, but I expect he will be. Haines was confirmed on a 84-10 vote. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and some others were in the opposition to her. I'm sure Rand Paul for the most right reasons. Other people, I'm not sure, what their real motivations were. So this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. And basically what I want to do is go country by country and look at the foreign policy that Haines and Blinken put forward, and kind of look at, how the Biden policy will likely take shape. So this is titled Biden's Nominees Call for Tough Stance on China During Confirmation Hearings. Antony Blinken said Trump was right to take a tougher approach on China, and which is a real crazy thing, right? That, the Biden administration ran on essentially being anti-Trump, when one of the, biggest real Trump foreign policy stances was his aggressive approach towards China. And now, in the confirmation hearing, this happens before Trump is even out of office, Blinken is saying that, yep, Trump is right to support, take this aggressive stance against China. Avril Haines said that she believes the U.S. should take an aggressive stance against Beijing. This is what the U.S. has been doing already, and says she will prioritize countering the threat of Russia's counterintelligence. I'm guessing this means we're going to see a similar volume of U.S. naval operations in the South China Sea and off of the coast of China, like near Taiwan. Biden has said that he supports the Japanese territorial claims to the Senkaku Islands, which are just off of China's coast and actually also claimed by Taiwan. And so I'm guessing we're going to see a very similar China policy, at least when it comes to military, counterintelligence, cyber, and stuff like that. Maybe he pulls back the trade war a little bit, but overall it looks like we're going to have quite a bit of confrontation with China during the Biden years. Also, I think worth noting is the political pressure here, much like what Trump faced when it came to Russia during his administration, where, every time he tried to do anything involving Russia, people were crying treason and Putin's puppet. And, John Brennan went as far as to suggest that just Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin was an act of treason. And so I think Biden will likely face the same problems from the Republicans when it comes to China. And so I think he'll be easily maneuvered into taking maybe an even more aggressive stance towards China, much like Trump ended up doing with Russia compared to Obama. That story from Reuters. Biden will recognize Gaiido as Venezuela's leader, top diplomat says. This is again Antony Blinken in his confirmation hearing, where he said that the U.S. will seek to more effectively target sanctions against Venezuela and try to, I guess, help Juan Gaiido become president of that country. Again, there's so many issues with this policy. It was really a crap pot policy of the Trump administration. Juan Gaiido was a completely unknown figure in Venezuela when he claimed to be the leader, and he claimed to be the leader as because he was the leader of the National Assembly. And so imagine that Venezuela in 2019 recognized Nancy Pelosi as the leader of the United States because she was the head of the House of Representatives. Well, that's pretty absurd. However, imagine that in 2020, Trump gets reelected, the Republicans actually could take control of the House, and I don't know who Republican Liz Cheney is now the Speaker of the House, right? But the Venezuelans still say that Nancy Pelosi is president, even though she no longer holds the Speaker of the House title that she was using to, claim her presidency. That's essentially what the U.S. policy is in Venezuela. And now the Biden administration coming in has a perfect chance of saying, we're not sticking with this crap pot policy. It's absolutely absurd. Nobody, cares who Juan Gaiido is. He hasn't been able to, get power in that country in the past 2 years now, and he's never going to. And yet they're doubling down on it. And so Like I said, at least on the China policy, it looks like more of the same. On the Venezuela policy, it looks like more of the same. And on Israel policy, yes, it's going to be more of the same. Hopefully, this article loads here for those of you watching on YouTube. The article I do have is from The Hill, and it is titled Blinken Affirms Plan to Keep U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And it outlines basically the Biden administration's plan that we are going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which was this bold action taken by Donald Trump at the time. And then we're also going to keep the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem because, that's the capital of Israel. And so, it's very odd how the Trump policy went so far. And again, Trump was this extremist kind of guy who was going to support right-wing movements. Well, here you actually have it happening in Israel. And the Biden administration comes in and says, yeah, we agree with that and we're going to keep that policy. Now, it'll be interesting to see if maybe like stepping forward, the Biden administration isn't putting out something like the deal of the century, which is just, a real final giveaway to the Israelis and, allowing the Palestinians to be subjugated and everything. But at the same time, just certifying normalizing Trump's policies are already a step too far. We know from previous statements from both Biden and Antony Blinken that they do not believe that is the aid, the 3 point something billion dollars the U.S. sends to Israel every year, which helps them to oppress the Palestinians, should in any way be conditioned on treating the Palestinians fairly. Moving on to Iran, where we have some optimism, right? We have a cause to be optimistic. Biden was a proponent of the JCPOA when he was Obama's number 2, and really seemed like it was something that he supported. It took war with Iran off the table. It helped to bring a little bit more stability to the Middle East, which seems like something Biden should want. And so maybe we're going to have it, but here we have an article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Biden's intel chief says we are a long ways from returning to Iran deal. This sounds bad to me. While she didn't say we're not going to try to return to it, she says that Biden has indicated that if Iran were to come back into compliance, that he would dread that we do so as well. And she says, and frankly, I think we're a long ways from that. Yeah, because she's got the whole thing backwards. The U.S. has broken the deal. The U.S. needs to remove sanctions from Iran and get back into the deal first, and then hope that the Iranians will follow. And I'm sure that they will. They've signaled that they have every intention to, and the Europeans and the Chinese and the Russians and all the other parties to the JCPOA absolutely want the Iranians to re-enter the deal. I find the long ways rhetoric interesting because when we go to this article I have from Axios, U.S. is a long way from returning to the Iran nuclear deal, Blinken says. So it makes me think that either this was an official talking point or something that President Biden particularly said, that the U.S. was a long way from returning to the Iran nuclear deal. He also said that the U.S. was going to consult our Gulf allies and Israel on the issue. Now, not all the Gulf allies are necessarily bad on the Iran nuclear deal. I think Qatar is probably interested in having it in Oman as well. However, the two key Gulf Arab allies are Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which are both absolutely against the deal, and so is Israel. And it makes it sound like consulting those parties will make it less likely that the U.S. returns to the deal, especially because I don't think the Iranians are going to wait a year. They're not going to wait a long way. The U.S. will have to start removing sanctions, and then maybe made some kind of agreement that the U.S. removes some sanctions, Iran takes a step back towards compliance with the deal, and we eventually get there that way. On Afghanistan, I don't have the right article up here. Anyways, on Afghanistan, Antony Blinken says that the Biden administration needs to look at the deal and that they had not had access to it before. This seems like some real chaos from the Trump administration, that they didn't show the Biden team the deal coming in, which maybe is a transition issue, or this is just a way that the Biden team is maybe delaying on it. Maybe they do know all the details of it, but there are supposed secret annexes of the deal that hadn't become public yet. So if the Trump administration didn't share that information behind the scenes, this is possible. So I really don't have any indication on Obama's Afghanistan policy yet. A lot of people are talking about the U.S. reduction of troops in Afghanistan, which is great. However, we have this article, again, Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Over 18,000 Pentagon contractors remain in Afghanistan despite troop reduction. So he says that, we reduced the number of troops, but we have a huge number of paid contractors in that country. Now, not all 18,000 are Americans. 4,700 are Afghans that were hired locally, and then about a third are U.S. citizens. But still, the U.S. number of armed presence in that country is probably a hell of a lot closer to 10,000 now than it is to zero. And that's a pretty important thing to think about when people say that Trump is ending the war. Also, what's going to happen with these contractors? 18,000's a hell of a lot, and it's enough to really have some operations with, to have some real military ability with. And so look, if the U.S. pulls the last 2,500 troops out, but is then just having Blackwater run the war, is that really any better? On Yemen, Blinken said that the U.S. will end military support for Saudi Arabia in short order and will immediately look at the terrorist designation for the Houthi. So, two things on this. I thought the first part of the statement was pretty solid, right? If they really mean short order, next couple of weeks, that we end military support for Saudi Arabia and Yemen, that's about as best as you could hope for from President Biden. And I'll be really thrilled if that is his policy. The whole Yemen can't wait thing is absolutely true. The people there are starving to death in massive numbers. The UN is saying the worst humanitarian crisis in 40 years. And this is something that has been manufactured in Yemen by the United States and Saudi Arabia since 2015. The 2015 date's important because this was the Obama policy before, when Biden was vice president. And so he's brought a lot of the old Obama retreads in. Maybe they don't undo this war because they started it. At the same time, during the Trump administration, some of the Obama people actually sought out legal counsel about potentially being guilty of war crimes from this war. And so, if they are concerned, maybe they will try to end the U.S. military support pretty quickly. Short order is a word that can mean just about anything in U.S. politics. And so while I find this statement encouraging, I'm certainly not ecstatic over it. And then the military support I thought was key, because does that mean helping Saudi Arabia enforce the blockade of Yemen? Intelligence? Are we going to keep fixing their planes that they need to bomb Yemen? There's a lot of, I think, remaining questions about that. And then just real quick on the terrorist designation level, the interesting part I thought was that Blinken clarified to say that, if he thought that the Biden administration would assess if they thought that designation was going to help end the war, help the Houthis be encouraged to end the war. And so, this is one of the things where it should be assessment of, are the Houthis a terrorist group? Is it going to starve civilians? Not, is it going to encourage the Houthis to end the war? Maybe some cruel people in the Biden administration decide, well, hell, actually, it's not good for the Yemeni people, but, it's going to push the Houthis to quit in a couple months, and we end up with essentially the Clinton policy for Iraq, where we just helped starve another 500,000 children to death during the Biden years. That seems entirely possible from what Blinken said, but it is encouraging that the U.S. would end military support of Saudi Arabia. All right. I have an article here from Moon of Alabama, and he highlights that Blinken said that the U.S. will work against the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline just days before Trump left office. They announced they were sanctioning a Russian ship that was able to lay the pipe for that pipeline. I don't think there's many ships that could do this. It's kind of a crazy thing to do. And so if the German companies now work with that Russian ship, they're violating U.S. sanctions. And so this could be a real issue to completing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Blinken said that Biden believes the pipeline is a bad idea and that his administration would use every persuasive tool to convince its partners in Germany to discard the project. I think that means heavy sanctions use. This, of course, it would bring cheaper energy into Central Europe, which is probably highly needed. People all over the world need cheaper energy, but not everybody in Central Europe. Germany is a fairly wealthy country, but not all the countries they are. This could be really huge, and the U.S. is trying to prevent it just so they have more leverage over their partners. And, of course, there's some mercantilism going on here where the U.S. could sell Germany liquefied natural gas if it isn't coming through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. All right, I think this is the last one I have from antiwar.com. Biden's top diplomat calls to rebuild U.S. alliances and counter threats. On Tuesday, Blinken said Biden's called for the revitalization of U.S. alliances to counter threats from countries like China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. And so this sounds a hell of a lot like they're sticking with Trump's national security strategy of focusing not only on terrorist threats, but also on what they label as rogue states like Iran and North Korea, and then great power competition like China and Russia. I mean, overall, from everything I've read and I've heard from Haines and Biden and Biden's press secretary and Antony Blinken here, maybe there are some places where the Biden policy could be better. Looking at Yemen, extending the New START treaty are two places where I'm somewhat encouraged. I didn't see much on Syria from either, which is one of the conflicts I could see the Biden administration escalating, and not a whole lot on Iraq either, which also could be escalated. And same with Afghanistan. It looks like he's continuing just pretty status quo militarily against China, Venezuela with the policy to try and install Juan Gaiido there. And then Iran could be better, but I'm not exactly encouraged by what I've heard so far. So, there's potential for the Biden administration. Obviously, we could end a war during the Biden administration. That said, we could escalate wars too. And, I'm not hearing anything promising from his cabinet pit so far. All right, that's where I'll wrap for today. I'm sure I'll have more on Biden's cabinet. His Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, got the waiver he needed because he hasn't been retired from the military long enough to sit in what is supposed to be the civilian seat as Secretary of Defense. And so I'm guessing we'll have a confirmation hearing for him pretty quickly, and then he will likewise be approved. And a few more administration pits will probably be in the next couple of weeks. It looks like the Republicans are going to focus on getting Biden's cabinet through and delaying Trump's inauguration or impeachment, And so, that's going to be that's probably going to be the next couple of weeks in the Senate, a lot of confirmation hearings. And so I'll continue to talk about what the signals for the coming Biden policies. I don't think it's a great sign, but hell, let's end the war in Yemen. Share the show on YouTube, Conflicts of Interest. I have a LBRY account now for the show as well. I posted up there. All the podcast feeds, if you listen there, give it a rating and review. LibertarianInstitute.org is where you can find all my work. Check out antiwar.com, and then Subscribestar. So donate to the show, and then get in on the Discord channel. Thanks, everyone.